The snowmelt came early that spring. A sharp wind swept down from the Bitterroot Mountains, carrying with it the raw scent of thawing pine and river ice splitting into chaos. Beneath the grey morning sky, Claire Norwood adjusted her lens and leaned further over the rock ledge, boots planted in the slush. She had been following this particular wolf pack for weeks, never interfering, never speaking, just watching. It was March 14th, the 3rd anniversary of the day her life fell apart. From her vantage point, the clearing below was blurred by mist and rising sun. 9 wolves moved along the far bank of the creek, their silhouettes flowing like smoke against the melting drifts. 3 pups weaved between the legs of the adults, still awkward in their footing. Claire had named them unofficially in her notes, Scout, Blaze, and Dusk, but she hated herself for doing it. Naming meant attachment. Attachment meant pain. She hadn't spoken to another human in 89 days. Her cabin sat half-buried in snow 2 miles back, its mortgage dangling over her head like a noose. She had $82 left in her bank account. The bills had eaten everything after her mother passed. Her mother, Elaine Norwood, the woman who raised her on stories of wounded hawks and healing wolves, who taught her to listen before acting, and then left Claire with $45,000 in medical debt and a closet full of faded red scarves. She checked her camera. Full battery. Shutter speed adjusted. Through the viewfinder she could see the alpha male sniffing the water's edge, testing the current. A thick scar cut across the left side of his face. 3 claw-like lines like someone had tried to erase him with nails. She had never seen him cross the river at this time of year. Too dangerous. The pack began to shift, moving slowly upstream where the water narrowed between rocks. All except one. The smallest pup, Scout, hung back, nose buried in the snow, tracing some invisible thread. By the time he looked up, the pack had moved 30 yards away. The others didn't notice. Claire held her breath as the pup padded towards the edge, paws tentative on the slick rock. Then he jumped. The first leap cleared a gap between stones. The second he landed wrong. The rock was glazed with meltwater and ice. His paws skidded. Scout vanished. There was no sound at first, just the rush of water and a sickening lurch in Claire's chest. Then came the splash. The wolf pup reappeared, thrashing, helpless against the surge. The creek, fed by sudden Chinook winds, had become a torrent in under an hour. Chunks of ice spiraled like knives. Claire's hands trembled as she watched through the lens. The pack exploded into movement, yips, howls, chaos. The alpha paced the shoreline, snarling at the water, but none of them went in. Scout's head surfaced once, then again, then again. Then it was gone. Claire's training screamed at her. Don't interfere. Just observe. The moment you intervene, you destroy the natural balance. But something inside her cracked. Not a thought, not a decision, just movement. She threw the camera down. It landed lens up in the snow, still recording. Claire was already running, feet pounding the icy slope, slipping, arms flailing. Her breath turned to fire in her lungs as she tore through the underbrush, leaping over fallen branches and boulders. The current roared louder with each step. She reached the riverbank. 30 feet downstream, Scout surfaced again, his small head barely above the churning surface. Claire yanked off her outer coat. Wind sliced through her thermal base layer, but she barely felt it. Her fingers fumbled at her belt, pulling free the climbing rope from her pack. One end she tied around her waist, the other looped around the thick root of a downed pine. She paused for half a heartbeat, not to think, but to lock eyes. Across the creek, the scarred alpha stood still, staring at her. He didn't growl, he didn't flee. Claire nodded, as if seeking permission from something she couldn't name. Then she jumped. The cold hit her like a punch to the ribs. She gasped, instinctive and ragged. Water filled her ears, her mouth, her boots. Her legs kicked, useless at first. The rope pulled taut and dragged behind her like a snake. She angled her body sideways with the current, just like they taught her in certification courses years ago. Let the river carry you. Don't fight it. Guide it. Scout appeared again, 5 yards ahead, going under. Claire kicked harder, arms clawing through the freezing sludge. Her breath came in gasps, her vision blurred at the edges. Pain shot through her shoulder as something heavy struck her. Ice, a branch. She didn't know. The world flipped. Down became up. Then her hand touched fur. Scout. His claws flailed in panic, scoring deep into her forearm. Blood spilled into the water, but she held on. She pulled him to her chest, locking her arms tight around his shivering body. The pup squirmed once, then stopped. Claire could feel his heart racing against her own. She turned toward shore. The rope had reached full extension. She was 20 feet downstream, the river still dragging her under. She kicked again, then screamed as her leg caught on something. Submerged branch? Rock? She went under. This time, the world turned black. Her lungs screamed, her fingers lost grip. Scout was slipping away. Claire fought harder. Her fingers caught his tail. She pulled. He climbed her chest, his claws finding purchase. She felt his body on her shoulders, heavy and trembling. Her vision was narrowing now, muscles failing, limbs numb. But she saw the rock, just ahead. One last push. Claire lunged, caught it with her fingers, slipped, grabbed again. This time she held. She pulled them both to shore. Scout was the first to touch snow. Claire followed, collapsing onto her stomach, gasping, coughing, shaking so violently her teeth chattered against each other. 5 minutes and 40 seconds in. Freezing water. Hypothermia had already set in. Then came the silence. Not the quiet of safety. The silence of being watched. She turned her head. They were there, 6 wolves, surrounding her in a perfect arc. Not attacking, not retreating. Just watching. The scarred alpha approached slowly, step by step, his eyes never leaving hers. Claire couldn't move, couldn't run, couldn't speak. Her body was shutting down. She whispered, barely audible, "I just wanted to help." Scout wobbled on shaky legs, shook the water from his fur, and trotted, not to his pack, but back to Claire. He pressed his small body into her chest. The alpha stopped moving. A long moment passed. Then he did the unthinkable. He lay down beside her. Then the rest followed. A full circle of wolves lying in the snow, pressing their bodies close to hers and Scout's, shielding them from the wind. The world slowed. Claire's breath came easier. Not warm, but no longer alone. The mountains held their breath, and so did she. The last thing Claire remembered was the sound of snow crunching beneath paws. Then darkness. It wasn't the kind of darkness that came with closing your eyes. It was the kind that flooded your mind when your body was losing the fight. A cold, soft black, creeping in from the edges. Her muscles had stopped shaking. Not because she was warm, because she was slipping. She knew what that meant. Final stages. She barely felt the wet wolf pup pressed against her chest, nor the slow build of body heat accumulating against her back. It wasn't until something heavy settled along her spine that her senses clawed back, screaming for her to wake up. Claire blinked. Once, then again. Blurred shapes, snow, fur, eyes. They weren't attacking. They were surrounding her. A circle. Not tight, not tense, but present. Alive. Scout lay curled at her sternum, his damp fur stuck to her jacket, chest rising and falling with soft, quick breaths. His yellow eyes blinked slowly, then closed again in a motion that felt more like trust than exhaustion. Just behind her, she felt warmth. Dense, wild warmth. She turned her head with effort, each muscle straining against cold and shock. The scarred alpha. He was lying flush against her back, pressing his thick winter coat into her, breathing in a slow, deliberate rhythm. His head was turned slightly toward her ear, eyes half-lidded but alert. The others had taken positions too. The she-wolf, Scout's mother, sat just near her boots, nose twitching with worry, but her body loose, not aggressive. Two others, larger males, had settled near her shoulders and thighs, forming what could only be described as a shelter. A living windbreak. Claire's brain refused to believe what she was seeing. Wolves do not do this. They do not shield humans. They do not protect the weak of another species. Yet here she was, dying in the snow, and they were trying to keep her alive. Her breath hitched in her throat. It came out shaky, her fingers twitched inside soaked gloves. Somewhere deep in her survival instinct, training flared. Movement is good. Thinking is better. Her voice broke into a whisper. "Why, are you here?" No one answered, of course, but the alpha blinked slowly, ears rotating toward her like he'd caught the words. Claire let her eyes drift to Scout. There was something tangled around his back leg, a strip of red fabric. She blinked harder, trying to focus. A scarf? It was faded, frayed at the edges, caught in his fur like a bandage tied by some unseen hand. She knew that pattern. Mountains, wildflowers, her mother's scarf. A knot formed in Claire's chest, sharp and rising. It couldn't be. Elaine had died 6 months ago. The cabin had been locked ever since. That scarf was tucked away in a drawer, wasn't it? Or had she taken it on a hike one day? Left it behind? How had it ended up wrapped around the leg of a wolf pup? She was fading again. No time for questions, just cold, and the beat of her heart slowing, despite the heat building around her. The alpha shifted closer, his body now fully against her, massive chest rising with hers, like they shared a single breath. He didn't move like a wild creature, he moved like a guardian. She tried to move her hand toward Scout, but her arm didn't respond. Panic rose, her lips parted, but no sound came out. She was drowning again, but not in water, in her own body. Her thoughts spiraled. Not like this. Not now. Not after saving him. Her vision narrowed to a tunnel. The white of the snow turned grey, then black. Far off, maybe real, maybe not, she heard the sound of a growl. Low, commanding. The alpha. And then came another sound. Footsteps, human, breaking twigs, boots on frost. A voice, rough, male, drawn tight with adrenaline. Back away, now! Claire's eyes snapped open. Or thought they did. She couldn't be sure. A man stood 50 yards uphill, rifle raised, breath coming in clouds. His parka was caked in snow, the hood thrown back to reveal a weather-beaten face, mouth tight, eyes locked on the wolves. "Don't move!" he barked again, this time to her. "I'm getting you out of there!" Claire tried to shout. "No!" The wolves tensed. The circle broke slightly. The alpha rose to his feet, slowly but firmly, stepping between Claire and the rifle. Claire coughed. Her body heaved, and this time her voice cracked through the pain. "Don't shoot!" The man didn't lower the gun. "You don't understand," she croaked. "They're not hurting me. Mom, they're predators. They're surrounding you." "They're saving me." A long pause. Only the wind moved now, whispering through the trees. Claire summoned the last of her strength to sit up. Her limbs screamed. Her head swam. But she managed it. "You'll have to shoot through me," she said. Scout stirred at her words, moved closer. The she-wolf followed, but didn't threaten. The man, probably a hunter maybe, rancher, was frozen in place. The barrel of the rifle trembled slightly. "You went into that river for him?" he asked, disbelief painted across his face. Claire nodded. would do it again. Silence. His gun lowered an inch. The Alpha didn't move. Then, impossibly, the man let the rifle fall to his side. "I thought they killed my livestock," he said, voice brittle. "I was going to take them out today. Track ends here. Now I find you. Alive." Claire's body swayed. Her teeth chattered. The Alpha took one step back, not retreating, making room. Then, in the most surreal moment of her life, Claire saw the man kneel in the snow, unzipping his coat. He reached into a side pocket, pulled out a familiar item. A photograph. Old, worn at the edges. A woman, Claire's mother, smiling, with a young wolf pup licking her cheek. He looked at Claire, his eyes wide. Her name was Elaine, right? Claire's heart stopped. "Yes," she said. "She was my mother." The man's eyes glistened. "She saved me once, years ago. She gave me her scarf, said life's longer than your worst day." Claire looked at Scout, at the red fabric still tied around his leg. The Alpha stood beside her. And suddenly it made sense. This was no accident. This was a return, not of wolves, but of something older, of instinct, of debt, of grace passed forward through fur and ice and time. She reached out with her injured arm. Scout pressed his head into her palm. Her voice broke. "Then maybe she saved me too." And around them, the wolves held the line. The smell of wood smoke came first, then warmth. Claire stirred beneath thick layers of wool and cotton, her face pressed against a pillow that wasn't hers. Her body ached like she'd been hit by a truck, but there was a softness to the air. No snow, no wind. She blinked open her eyes. Wooden ceiling, log beams, the low crackle of a fire nearby. She was alive. And not alone. "You're awake," a man's voice said gently from across the room. Claire turned her head, every vertebra in her neck protesting, and saw a figure sitting near the hearth, middle-aged, lean, in an old canvas jacket. His beard was shot with grey, his face weathered by sun and time, but his eyes held a cautious kindness. "I was starting to think you'd hibernated," he added with a half-smile. She tried to sit up. Bad idea. Pain flared through her shoulders and ribs. "Easy now," he said, standing and walking over. "You're banged up and hypothermic. But you'll live. Barely." "Where?" Her throat scratched like sandpaper. "My cabin. Name's Ray Cormack. You were out cold when I found you, passed out near the river, half frozen. Those wolves were still around you." Claire tensed. "Relax. They didn't threaten me. Oddest thing I've ever seen. They were guarding you." Her mind flashed back to the warmth, the bodies pressed against her, the yellow eyes watching the wind. "Scout," she murmured. "The pup? He's all right. Curled up on your porch, actually. Won't leave." Ray helped her sit, handed her a mug of something warm and herbal smelling. "Your temperature was in the danger zone," he said. "I wrapped you in everything I had. Got you back here on my snowmobile. Frankly, I wasn't sure you'd make it." Claire sipped the tea. Bitter. Medicinal. She didn't care. "You said wolves were guarding me." Ray nodded, eyes narrowing with something between reverence and disbelief. "Not attacking. Not skittish. Just there. Like they knew you." Claire swallowed hard. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from the cold now, but from memory. "There was a pup in the river. I jumped in. It was instinct. I didn't think." Ray raised a brow. "You don't strike me as reckless." "I'm not, that's the thing. I haven't intervened in 3 years. Until now." Claire's eyes drifted to the window. Through the glass she could see the porch, and Scout, curled tightly against the corner, asleep, but alert. His leg was still wrapped in that red cloth, the scarf. Her breath caught in her chest. "That fabric," she said, suddenly focused. "That scarf on his leg. Where is it?" I didn't touch it. Figured it was part of whatever this is. She pushed back the blankets, ignoring the groan of her body. Ray tried to stop her, but she was already at the door, yanking it open. Cold air blasted her, but she barely noticed. Scout stirred at her presence, stood, and limped over. His eyes were steady. She crouched, slowly, and reached for his leg. The cloth was faded now, fraying at the edges, but the pattern was unmistakable. Red background, tiny embroidered ridges, wildflowers, her mother's scarf, the one Elaine Norwood used to wear in her hair every time they hiked. It had vanished months before her death, during a particularly confused episode. Claire had looked for it everywhere. Her hands shook as she untied the fabric. It was old, weathered by time and weather, but intact. "How did you get this?" she whispered. Scout looked at her, tilted his head slightly, and bumped his nose to her knee. Ray had followed her outside. His voice was low. "You recognize it?" "It belonged to my mom. She died 6 months ago." He looked surprised. "I'm sorry, what was her name?" "Elaine Norwood." Ray's eyes flickered, then darkened with something like memory. "Wait," he said. "Elaine. From back near Copper Basin? Tall woman, used to volunteer with wildlife rescues?" Claire's breath caught. "Yes. How do you know that?" "I met her, years ago. 1985, maybe? She saved my life." Claire turned to him fully. "I was hunting. Got mauled by a bear. Real bad. I was bleeding out. She found me, pulled me off the trail, got me to shelter, wrapped my leg with a red scarf to stop the bleeding." He paused. "Same one you're holding now." Claire stared at him, stunned. "It's been in my family ever since," Ray said. "Until a few years back. After my boy died, I couldn't look at it anymore. I tossed it up into the foothills one night." Her mind spun. The scarf, lost. The wolves, finding it. Somehow giving it to Scout. "Ray, this isn't random." "No, it isn't." He stepped forward, looking past her to Scout. "I've seen that pack before, especially the big male. Scar across his muzzle. Used to think he was dangerous. Now I think he's something else." Claire sank down onto the porch step, holding the scarf like a lifeline. "My mom never talked about that bear attack," she said softly. She was already starting to lose things near the end. Her memories came in flashes. "I didn't know." "She told me something before I left," Ray said. "Said, life is longer than your worst day. I never forgot that." Claire stared out across the trees. The snow had stopped. The wind had settled. She felt a stirring inside her, not peace, exactly, but possibility. "This can't be coincidence," she said. "Scout, the scarf, the pack, they knew." "Knew what?" "That I was still carrying something, guilt, grief, all of it." Ray knelt beside her. "You think your mom's scarf led you back to that pup?" "I think it saved both of us." She turned to look at Scout again. He didn't run. He didn't flinch. He sat down beside her like he'd always belonged there. And maybe he had. Claire held the scarf tight in her hand, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. The morning frost hadn't yet lifted from the pines when Claire sat on Ray's porch, the scarf folded neatly in her lap. Scout lay by her feet, eyes half closed, but his ears twitched at every sound in the forest. Still alert. Still ready. Ray emerged from the cabin, mug of coffee in hand, but his face was tighter than before. He hadn't slept. Neither had she. "You all right?" he asked. Claire nodded, though the knot in her stomach said otherwise. The truth about the scarf, her mother, the pup, it had all cracked something open, and now everything felt louder. Ray leaned against the porch rail, sipping quietly. "Claire, I was in town yesterday before the storm hit. Picked up a few things." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded newspaper. The headline wasn't bold, but it stopped her breath cold. Wildlife biologist ruled not at fault in bear incident. Viral outrage continues. Her photo was smaller than she remembered. Her face pale, hair pulled back, expression stiff. But underneath were the words she couldn't forget. Claire Norwood, the woman who killed the bear she was meant to save. Ray watched her reaction, eyes soft but steady. "I didn't ask," he said. "I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." Claire's fingers clenched. "They said I sedated the bear improperly, that it died because of me, but I followed every damn protocol. My co-worker, Marcus, he threw me under the bus, said I panicked." Ray didn't respond immediately. "You didn't strike me as someone who panics." "I don't. I calculate. I hesitate, maybe too much. But I don't panic." She looked out at the forest, voice low. "The bear woke up too early in transport. Kicked through the straps. The driver crashed. I blacked out. When I came to, the bear was dead and Marcus was already rehearsing the story." Ray sighed, then stepped inside without a word. When he returned, he held something different. A rifle. Claire stood up instantly. "What the hell is that for?" "There were shots fired in the eastern tree line, about 20 minutes ago. 2, maybe 3. High-powered. Someone's in the woods." She stared at the gun like it was a snake. "You think it's hunters?" He shook his head. "Too early in the season. And this area's off-limits right now. I have a bad feeling." Scout stood now, fur bristling. He faced the trees like something was already moving. "Ray, if you think I'm going to let you aim that at, I won't shoot unless I have to." He cut in, voice rougher than before. "But you need to know something about me, too." He gripped the edge of the porch like he was holding on to something heavier than the rifle. 5 years ago, my son Michael went out one night. Heard wolves near the livestock pen. He wasn't trying to hurt them, just scare them off." Claire held her breath. "I followed with a rifle. It was dark. I saw a silhouette. I fired." Silence. When I reached the body, he was still breathing. He said, "It's not your fault, Dad." Then he died. Claire's knees weakened. "I told the sheriff he'd taken his own life. Michael had a history of depression. It wasn't hard to sell. But it was a lie. I killed my own son thinking he was a predator." His hands trembled now. Just a little. "I've been trying to find something worth redeeming ever since. But I brought this today because I'm not losing anyone else to a bullet, mine or someone else's." Claire nodded, slowly. Her voice came out raw. "You think the wolves are in danger?" "I think Scout's pack doesn't know the difference between a warning shot and a hunter. And if someone sees them near people..." Claire stepped off the porch. Scout followed. "Then we go together." They hiked fast through the pines, the air tight with frost and tension. The snow crunched under boots and paws. The trail narrowed, then split, and Ray held up a hand. "There, footprints. Heavy, deep, human, and close." They followed them another 50 yards before the trees opened into a clearing. And there they were, the pack, 6 wolves, fanned out in a crescent formation. In the center, Scarface, still, alert, eyes locked forward. Opposite them stood a man, late 50s, red parka, holding a Remington 700, finger off the trigger, but not far. He turned when he saw them. "Stay back," he barked. "They're dangerous." Ray stepped forward, one hand raised, the other holding his rifle low. "Put the gun down," he said. "They're not attacking. They killed my goats, 12 head, last spring. I've tracked this pack for months. This ends now." Claire could feel Scout at her side, low growl in his throat. "Sir," she said, voice steady. "That pup you're looking at? I pulled him from a freezing river 2 days ago. He wouldn't be alive if he were the monster you think." The man's eyes flared. "He's part of the pack. They're all the same." Scarface didn't move. His eyes watched the man, then flicked toward Claire. Then Ray. Then back. He was reading the field like a general. "I lost my son to wolves," the man said. "That pup. That one right there. He was near my property the night it happened. I saw the scarf. Thought it was some damn trick." Claire froze. "What scarf?" "The red one. That one wrapped around his leg. I thought it belonged to my wife. She died last year. Breast cancer. Had a whole drawer of them." Claire stepped forward without thinking. "Where do you live?" "Copper Ridge, past Elk Hollow." Claire turned slowly toward Ray. His eyes went wide. "That's where Elaine lived before the cabin," Claire said, breath catching. "That's where she lost her first red scarf, the one I saw in childhood photos." The man blinked. "My wife bought it at a second-hand shop in town. Said it smelled like pine and lavender." Claire dropped her voice. "That was my mother's scent." Ray's voice broke the moment. "Claire, look." She turned. The wolves had lowered their heads. Not in threat. In acknowledgement. Even Scarface. The hunter faltered, his arms lowering slightly. "What is this?" "It's not what you think," Ray said softly. "They're not enemies. They're survivors, like us." Scout padded forward, slowly, and sat between the two humans. Right in the middle. Not challenging. Bridging. Claire stepped beside him, putting her hand on Scout's back. "If you shoot now," she said, "you'll kill more than a pup. You'll kill everything we're still trying to fix." Silence again. Then the man lowered the rifle. Not in surrender, but in recognition. He looked at Claire, then Ray, then at the wolves, Scarface most of all, and walked away. Claire exhaled shakily. Ray's hand dropped from the grip of his rifle. Scarface blinked once, then turned. The pack melted into the trees like ghosts. Scout stayed. Claire looked at Ray. "We can't keep running from what broke us," she said. Ray nodded, jaw tight. "No, we can't." Behind them, the woods held their breath, and for the first time in years, so did the past. The air turned sharp again, wind picking up through the trees, carrying with it the scent of pine, snow, and something more primal. Fear. Scout froze near Claire's side, his fur rising. Just ahead, Scarface stepped from the brush. Alone. No pack, no sound. Ray's breath hitched. His fingers slid instinctively toward the safety on his rifle. Claire caught the motion. "Don't." "He's approaching you, Claire." "He's not attacking." Ray raised the barrel. "Ray, don't you dare!" Scarface didn't move closer. He simply stood, eyes locked, head slightly lowered, tail still. No snarl, no warning, just presence, just watching. Ray's eyes narrowed. "I don't trust that look." "I do," Claire said softly. "You're shaking." "I'm freezing." "You're exhausted." "Still standing." Her legs trembled, not just from cold, but from the weight of everything that had gone unspoken for too long. "I can't let you risk it," Ray said. "If that wolf moves wrong," I said no. Claire stepped between the barrel and Scarface. Her body wasn't steady, but her voice was steel. Ray froze. "Claire, move. Not a chance." His eyes widened. "Do you understand what you're doing?" "Yes," she said. "And for once I'm doing it without hesitation." Scarface tilted his head. Just barely. 3 years ago," Claire began, "I got a call about a black bear hit by a truck outside Yellowstone. I was new, young, hungry to do things right. I followed protocol, sedated the bear by the book, got him in the van. My colleague, Marcus, drove. The bear woke up halfway there, panicked, thrashed. We crashed into a ditch." She looked down at Scout, then back up. "When I came to, the bear was motionless, blood on the floor. I thought he was dead. I thought I'd killed him." Marcus looked at me and said, "You messed up." Then he told everyone else I had. Her voice caught, just once, but she pushed through. By the time I got out of the hospital, the story had gone viral. Claire Norwood, reckless, incompetent. My face was everywhere. The woman who sedated a bear to death. I lost my job, I lost my husband, and I never defended myself. Ray didn't speak. Claire took a step closer to him, forcing him to lower the rifle a fraction. I didn't know. The bear survived. The wildlife team on scene resuscitated him. They rehabbed him. He was released 6 weeks later. Marcus never told me. He let me believe I'd killed him. Ray blinked. How do you know this now? Because someone sent me an article, a follow-up. The bear was tagged and tracked. They even named him Barlow. He's still out there, alive, healthy. And I never knew. The silence between them hung heavy, like snow-laden branches threatening to break. Claire dropped to her knees, not dramatically, but as if gravity had finally won. I carried that guilt for 3 years, she whispered. I let it destroy me. Every job, every friendship, every piece of who I was, because of one lie. Scout pressed against her side. She looked up, locking eyes with Ray. So if you're going to shoot that wolf, you're going to have to go through me. Ray's jaw clenched. Claire, you want to protect me? Then put the damn gun down and believe me when I say I don't need protection from him. Scarface still hadn't moved, watching, breathing, waiting. Ray looked between them, the woman shaking in the cold, the wolf scarred by time, the pup standing like a sentinel at her side. And finally he lowered the rifle. It didn't fall, it didn't clatter, but the air shifted. A sigh from the mountain. Claire exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Ray set the rifle on the ground and sat beside her. Slowly, deliberately. His eyes shone, not from the wind. I lost my son because I reacted too fast, he said, voice barely above the wind. And you lost your life because you didn't react at all. Claire turned toward him, stunned. Guilt's a thief. He continued, but maybe it doesn't get to keep everything. Scout stepped between them, sat, then looked back toward Scarface. The old wolf huffed once, deep, almost approving, then turned and walked back into the trees. Claire let herself collapse, fully this time, into the snow. Ray caught her before her head hit the ground, cradled her carefully. I should have believed you, he whispered. I should have believed in all of this. Scout curled next to her, his warm breath fogging against her cheek. She reached for his fur with a weak hand. It's okay, she said. You did now. Snow began to fall again. Not hard, not cruel, just enough to blanket what had been shattered, just enough to start covering it with something new, a clean slate. Or maybe, just maybe, a second chance. The fire cracked softly in the hearth. Rain whispered against the tin roof, but inside the cabin, the silence was thick and still. Claire sat bundled in a wool blanket, Scout curled asleep at her feet, his small body rising and falling with each breath. The red handkerchief still tied gently around his leg had dried stiff, its weathered threads curling at the edges. Across from her, Ray Cormack stared into the flames. He hadn't spoken since they returned. Not since Scarface disappeared into the pines without a sound, not since Claire nearly collapsed from cold and exhaustion. But now, something shifted. He stood, walked slowly to the cupboard, and pulled down a small metal tin. Weathered, rusted at the edges. Inside it, folded neatly, were old letters and a photo faded by time. He handed them to Claire. I wasn't planning to talk about this, Ray said. Not ever. Claire blinked at the photograph. A woman stood beside a much younger Ray, bloody, bruised, but alive, his leg bandaged with a familiar piece of cloth. Her breath hitched. That's Elaine Norwood. Ray said softly. Your mother? Claire stared. I didn't recognize her name at first. He said, but the way you spoke earlier, the things you said about her. It all came rushing back. He sat again, his shoulders hunched like the mountain had collapsed onto them. It was February of '85. I was out checking traps near Copper Creek. A bear had been circling the area for days. I wasn't careful, got mauled. Would have bled out in the snow if she hadn't found me. She dragged me 2 miles back to her cabin. Claire's fingers trembled. You were the man in her journals. Ray nodded. She used that red handkerchief to tie off the bleeding. It stayed with me for years. A reminder. Claire looked down at Scout's leg. The same cloth. Her mother's. Wrapped now around a wild creature. A circle forming, impossible yet true. She saved your life. Claire whispered. Ray's voice cracked. And you're saving that pup. It's like she saved me again. Claire's vision blurred. She felt the ache of something ancient returning. Not grief, not yet healing, but a crack in the numbness. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Ray didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, he took a long breath and continued. 5 years ago, I lost my son, Michael. He was 19. We'd been having trouble with wolves picking off sheep. One night, he ran outside with a flashlight, trying to scare them off. He wasn't armed, didn't want to hurt anything. Ray's eyes didn't leave the fire. I followed him out with a rifle, saw movement in the dark, pulled the trigger before I could think. The light fell, and I heard him say, Dad! Just that. Claire swallowed hard, a hand over her mouth. I held him while he died. Ray said, 90 seconds, that's all it took. His last words were, It's not your fault, Dad. I love you. And then he was gone. The fire snapped sharply, as if protesting the story. I told the sheriff it was suicide. Ray continued. He was my friend, helped cover it up, said it made more sense with Michael's depression history. No one questioned it. Ray finally looked up. But it was me. My fault. Claire could barely breathe. I started hunting wolves after that. Told myself it was revenge, that they were monsters, that if I could kill enough of them, it would mean something, that Michael died fighting beasts instead of because of his father's stupidity. Claire's voice came soft. And now? Ray looked down at Scout. They're not the monsters, he said. I am. No, Claire said. You made a mistake, and you've carried it ever since, just like I did. Ray laughed bitterly. Except your mistake wasn't even real. Claire looked away. Her throat tightened, but the guilt was. Scout stirred and sat up, ears twitching. Something outside. Claire followed his gaze. At the edge of the woods, shadows moved. Wolves, not threatening, not circling. They were forming a perimeter, a living shield, watching. Scarface stepped forward first. Then the others joined. Ray stood, tense, but didn't move for the rifle. Claire placed a hand on his arm. They're not here to hurt us. Then why are they here? To witness, she said. Scout stood and walked towards the door. He paused, looked back. Claire rose, legs still shaky, but steady enough to follow. Outside, the sky had cleared. The moonlight was pale silver on snow. Claire stepped barefoot onto the porch. The cold bit, but she didn't flinch. Scarface watched her. Still. Silent. Claire untied the red handkerchief from Scout's leg and held it in her palm. The wind caught its edges. This belonged to my mother, she said into the night. She used it to save a life. Scarface's ears twitched. I used it to save yours. For a moment, no one moved. Then, impossibly, Scarface stepped forward, closer than ever before. He lowered his head. Not submission, not threat, just recognition. Ray came to stand beside her. "She always said," he murmured, "the mountain doesn't judge. It only gives you space to choose." Claire looked up. "I think we chose right." The pack began to move again, not away, not toward, just present. Then, one by one, they turned and vanished into the trees. Scout hesitated, then trotted back to Claire and sat at her feet. Ray looked at her. "You think they knew about Elaine?" "I think they know more than we ever gave them credit for." Inside, the fire still burned. But outside, under the stars, something else had been reignited, a truth buried in time. And the ones we fear sometimes are the ones who save us. Claire had nearly forgotten about the camera. It was one of those things muscle memory set in place, mounted on the tripod at dawn, set to record in case something remarkable happened with the wolves. And something had. Far more than she ever imagined. It was Ray who spotted it, half buried under snow and pine needles on the ridge, its lens fogged but light still blinking faintly. He brought it to her without a word. They sat by the fire again, Scout asleep in front of the hearth, as Claire loaded the memory card onto her battered laptop. Ray didn't watch the screen. He sat with his hands folded, eyes low, jaw tight like he was bracing for a verdict. Claire clicked play. The footage was raw, grainy in places, but what it captured was undeniable. Her voice gasping, the icy current dragging her, Scout's whimpering cries, the wolves running along the shore, and then her rescue, her collapse, Scarface stepping forward, then Ray's voice, trembling, breaking, confessing everything in the flicker of firelight. About Michael, about the years of grief and fury misdirected at wolves, about Elaine. Claire listened again to her own words too, the confession she never thought she'd say out loud. The years of believing she'd killed the bear, of disappearing into silence, and then the wolves, not attacking, but forming a circle around her. Their warmth, their presence, the camera had recorded it all. Claire leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen. "Do you want me to delete it?" she asked quietly. Ray's voice was rough. "What would that change?" Claire didn't answer. Instead, she uploaded the file to her cloud drive and stepped away. It was late that night when someone, likely a hiker or snowmobiler, found the camera where Ray had retrieved it and posted a clip from the memory card. It was just the scene of her pulling Scout from the water. But that was enough. It hit 1 million views by sunrise. The next day, someone else posted a longer version. By then, the footage had made it to every corner of the internet. Headlines exploded. "Woman saves drowning wolf pup. Entire pack responds in unthinkable way." The redemption of Claire Norwood, wildlife pariah turned savior. Man confesses to son's death, while wolves guard a human woman. And somehow, the world didn't react with fury. It reacted with empathy. Thousands of comments flooded in. Survivors of accidents, parents who had lost children, former soldiers, wildlife lovers, mental health advocates, people who had made one mistake and spent years drowning in shame. The video became more than a story. It became a mirror. Claire's inbox flooded with interview requests, talk shows, publishers, advocacy groups. But what hit her hardest wasn't the press. It was the messages. One, from a young veterinary student in Vermont. "For years, I've been afraid to admit what happened with the rescue dog I lost. Watching you made me feel human again." Another, from an old park ranger. "We failed you, but you never stopped being what the wilderness needs." Then came the email she never expected. From the director of the Wildlife Rehabilitation Coalition, the very organization that had cut ties with her after the bear incident. "Claire, we saw the video, we saw the truth, and we owe you an apology. You followed protocol, you did everything right. We failed to stand by you, and we're deeply sorry. If you're ever open to returning, our door and our support is wide open." Claire stared at the screen, tears slipping silently down her face, but she didn't respond. Not yet. Meanwhile, something remarkable happened in Bitterroot Valley. Ray had been terrified the town would turn on him once they saw the footage. He stayed quiet for days, refusing to go into town. Until, finally, he had no choice. He went to the general store for propane, fully expecting to be met with cold shoulders. Instead, he found warmth. "I saw the clip," said old Martha Bell, handing him his change. "You loved your boy. That's all that matters." The sheriff stopped by his cabin later that day. Instead of threats, he brought pie and coffee. "You told the truth," the sheriff said. "That counts for something, more than most folks ever do." Claire received messages too, not just from strangers, but from people in town, the woman from the library, the gas station attendant, the mailman. They'd all seen the wolves. They all believed now. The narrative had changed, not because Claire fought back, but because the truth had spoken for itself. Later that week, a local council member proposed naming the ridge where the rescue happened Norwood Point. Another suggested forming a conservation alliance between local ranchers and biologists to manage wolf populations without violence. And Ray, weathered, grieving Ray, was asked to speak at the town hall, not as a criminal, but as someone who had survived his worst day and dared to face it. When he stood on stage, the lights dim and the room packed, he didn't talk like a politician. He just said, "I spent 5 years blaming animals for a mistake I made in the dark. But it wasn't their fault. And the only reason I'm standing here now is because a wolf and a woman showed me that mercy still exists in this world." He looked at Claire in the front row. "She didn't just save that pup, she saved me." Claire didn't smile. She wept. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't anymore. Scout barked once from beside her. The whole room turned. And someone laughed, then clapped. The others followed. Justice didn't come in a courtroom that week. It came from a town that chose compassion, and it came from a wild pack that, instead of tearing a human apart, chose to warm her back to life. Sometimes justice looks like a headline. Sometimes it looks like forgiveness. But sometimes it looks like a scarred wolf walking away into the woods, knowing he's finally been understood. 6 months had passed, and the mountain had thawed into a wild green canvas again. The snow had retreated to the highest ridges, and with its melt, the rhythms of the Bitterroot Valley shifted into spring, meadows bursting with wildflowers, creeks whispering instead of roaring, and the scent of pine warmed by sun pouring through open windows. Claire Norwood stood on the porch of the same cabin she once thought would be her tomb. Now it was her home, not a place to hide, but a place to begin. Her hand rested lightly on the gentle curve of her belly, just visible beneath her oversized flannel shirt. She was 6 months along. A baby girl. One her doctors once said she'd never be able to carry after the car accident years ago that fractured her pelvis and broke her spirit. Yet here she was, alive, expecting. A woman once shattered by the world, now slowly stitching herself back together. The cabin no longer felt like a mausoleum of her mother's life. The faded curtains had been replaced with ones Claire sewed herself from linen found in town. The dusty corners had been cleaned out, shelves restained, and an old rocking chair repaired and placed near the fireplace. There was even a crib now, hand-built by Ray. He had moved to a small rental just 2 miles down the dirt road, close enough to help, far enough to keep the quiet both of them still craved. They weren't lovers. That was never the shape of what they were. But there was something deeper, a bond forged not in romance, but in rescue, in shared brokenness and mutual rebuilding. Every Saturday, Ray stopped by with firewood or groceries, usually unannounced but never unwelcome. He always stayed just long enough to patch a fence, tighten a loose pipe, or check the battery in the generator before leaving with a quiet nod and a "see you Tuesday." He was a man still haunted, but no longer hunted by his past. The town had, astonishingly, embraced them both. Claire's memoir, Running with the Silence, had landed her a 6-figure book deal. The accompanying documentary, produced by a wildlife team from National Geographic, had gone viral for reasons beyond spectacle. It had heart, pain, truth. It sparked a national conversation about mental health, forgiveness, and the misunderstood role of apex predators in ecological balance. With the advance money, Claire paid off the remaining $42,000 mortgage on the cabin and had enough left to stock up for winter, prepare for the baby, and start a new non-profit focused on non-lethal livestock protection programs in wolf-populated areas. But the most important changes weren't the ones in her bank account. They were the ones in her bones. Claire no longer flinched at every unexpected knock on the door. She no longer avoided her own reflection. And every morning, after tea and oatmeal, she climbed the ridge with her camera slung over her shoulder and sat at the same lookout where she once filmed the moment that changed everything. And often, though not always, he came. Scout. Now 7 months old, his body was lanky and too big for the pup he still believed he was. His legs were long, his coat thick with winter scruff still shedding in tufts. But his eyes remained golden, curious, intelligent. And he always wore that tattered red scarf. No one knew why the pack hadn't removed it. Claire had long since stopped wondering. Scout emerged from the tree line that morning just as she snapped the last frame of a deer slipping into the ravine. He padded up, tail neutral, ears flicking in the breeze. He didn't approach too close, still a wolf, but sat roughly 15 yards away, watching her. Claire lowered her camera. "Morning, Scout," she said softly. The wind danced between them, lifting the scarf ever so slightly. "You're getting too big for that thing." Scout tilted his head, then sneezed. Claire chuckled. They stayed like that for several minutes. Just existing. Just being. Behind Scout, deeper in the trees, she saw glimpses of the pack, Scarface lingering on a ridge, the alpha female crouched beneath a tree. They never came close, not like that day in the snow. But they watched. They remembered. She remembered too. Claire touched her stomach and felt a soft flutter. The baby kicked. A reminder. "You'll meet her soon," she whispered to Scout. "And someday I'll tell her about the morning you changed everything." Scout stood. He didn't move. Immediately, just stretched, yawned, then turned toward the forest. Before disappearing, he looked back once. That was all. Not affection, not domestication, not loyalty in the human sense, but something. Recognition. Respect. Claire closed her eyes. The cold, the guilt, the silence. They hadn't vanished, but they no longer owned her. Now there was movement. Life. A new heartbeat beneath her ribs, a story still unfolding. As she made her way down the trail, camera in hand, the ridgeline behind her shimmered under the sunlight. Wind through the pines carried the distant echo of a howl. Not mournful, not wild, just enduring. Claire smiled. The wolves weren't gone. And neither was she. The book wasn't supposed to be called The Red Scarf. Claire had planned on something safer, more clinical, a study in coexistence or silent watchers, something that would fit neatly on a shelf beside scientific memoirs and conservation studies. But none of those titles held weight when she sat down to write. Because this story wasn't just about wolves, it wasn't even just about her. It was about a woman who once gave a stranger a piece of fabric to stop his bleeding. It was about a pup pulled from a raging current, wrapped in that same faded red scarf. And it was about the slow, imperfect redemption that stretched across decades, woven through guilt, grief, and grace. So she named it The Red Scarf. The first draft poured out of her like a confession. Late nights by the fire, early mornings when the baby kicked just before sunrise. She wrote through it all, her collapse, the silence, the lies, the water, the wolves. She told the truth about Marcus, about the bear, about the years she thought she was the villain of her own story. But she didn't stop there. She wrote about Ray, his son, his sorrow, his second chance. She wrote about Elaine, her mother's mind unraveling like a frayed thread, but still, somehow, managing one final act of legacy through a square of red cloth. She wrote about Scout, of course, and how a wild animal had reminded her what it meant to trust again. When the book was released, it hit shelves with modest expectations and exploded within weeks, not because of celebrity endorsements or clever marketing, because people needed it. Readers didn't just buy the book, they lived inside it. They sent letters, hundreds, then thousands, detailing their own moments of guilt, of forgiveness, of choosing life on the day they almost didn't. The video of the rescue continued to circulate, reshared every few months with renewed urgency as the world seemed to forget, and then remember how badly it needed hope. And in the middle of it all stood Scout. Now nearly full-grown, his lean frame filled out into a graceful, powerful silhouette, still marked by the red scarf that he now wore like a badge. Photographers tracked his movement respectfully. Conservationists debated how much of his behavior was nature versus nurture. But to Claire, he was never anything more or less than a wolf who once chose to stay beside her when she was dying. That choice had changed everything. Children in Bitterroot painted him in school murals. Artists embroidered his likeness on quilts, mugs, calendars. He became more than a wolf. He became a symbol, not of tameness, but of mercy. It would have been easy to leave the fame at that, to rest in the glow of publication deals and quiet validation. But Claire had something else in mind. She used her earnings and the growing attention on her name to create the Boundary Line Initiative, a non-profit dedicated to bridging the divide between ranchers and wildlife conservationists. The center was built just outside Missoula, on neutral ground between state forest and grazing leases. It offered conflict mediation, workshops on livestock-safe fencing, predator deterrence, and, perhaps most importantly, open conversations. Claire didn't take sides. She told stories. Ray was one of the first guest speakers. He didn't read from notes. He just stood under the timber-framed ceiling of the new community center and said, "I once shot at what I didn't understand. I buried my son because of it. These wolves, they didn't take my boy. My fear did, and my silence. Don't make the same mistake." People listened. Because he didn't ask them to believe in wolves, he asked them to believe in change. Claire sat in the back of the room, her daughter, Elena Ray Norwood, curled asleep in her sling against her chest. She was 4 months old, with a grip like her mother's and her grandfather's dark eyes. Sometimes Claire still woke up in cold sweats. Trauma didn't leave you just because the news cycle moved on, but those moments passed quicker now. Easier to breathe through, easier to walk out of. The land healed her as much as any therapist or apology could. So did the wolves, especially Scout, who still came. Not every day, not even every week, but often enough. He would appear on the ridge, always alone, always at a distance. Sometimes he howled. Other times he sat and watched while Claire worked her camera, Elena strapped to her chest, cooing softly. One day when Elena was older, Claire would tell her everything. She would take her to the river, show her the rocks, the ledge, the fallen log that once served as a final barrier between life and drowning. She would show her the red scarf, now framed inside the visitor center at the Boundary Line Initiative. And she would tell her the story. Not just about wolves, but about guilt that doesn't get to own you, about mothers who leave legacies in cloth and courage, about wild things that sometimes save you just by staying. Claire had once believed she was broken. Now she understood. Some things don't need fixing. They just need space. And sometimes, when the wind moved just right across the valley, it carried the sound of a howl. Not mournful, not fierce, just a voice echoing back. We're still here. We remember. The afternoon light stretched long across the Bitterroot Hills, painting the valley in hues of gold and rust. Aspen leaves drifted gently from the trees like slow-falling confetti. The air smelled of pine and old firewood, laced with the faintest bite of coming frost. Claire stood on the back porch of the cabin, her daughter's small hand wrapped tightly around her fingers. Elena was nearly 3 now, wild curls, freckled nose, and an endless stream of questions. She wore tiny hiking boots, a sweater with wolf ears on the hood, and a red scarf wrapped around her neck. Up ahead, on the grassy ridge that overlooked the valley, Scout sat still and tall, watchful, weathered, his muzzle touched with grey. He was no longer the lanky pup who once drifted half dead through the current. He had grown into his frame, into his role, into legend. "Is that really him?" Elena asked, craning her neck. Claire smiled. "Yes, that's Scout." They walked quietly, crunching leaves beneath their boots until they reached the rise. Scout heard them long before they arrived. He didn't turn his head, but his ears twitched, acknowledging their presence. Elena let go of Claire's hand and took a careful step towards him. "Can I pet him?" Claire gave a small nod. "Only if he lets you." The little girl approached slowly, instinctively gentle. Scout glanced back, eyes soft but alert. Then, just as he'd done years before, he allowed it. Elena's small fingers brushed the fur behind his ear, and she giggled. "Is he still guarding the cabin?" she asked. Claire crouched beside her daughter, watching Scout with quiet reverence. "No," she said. "He's not guarding the cabin." A pause. "He's guarding what matters." Scout blinked once, then turned his gaze back towards the horizon. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the distant sound of a hawk's cry and the smell of pine needles. Claire stood and looked out too. The land hadn't changed. The pain hadn't vanished. But they were no longer ruled by it. Inside the cabin, a radio had been left playing low, as it often was. The voice of a local public broadcaster drifted through the open windows, barely loud enough to reach the ridge. "Tonight," the voice read, slow and steady. "We honor a woman who jumped into ice not for glory, but for a truth buried in the snow." Claire's eyes closed, just for a moment. The wind whispered again, as if in agreement. Scout rose slowly, joints stiffer than they once were, and padded a few steps forward to sit beside Claire and Elena. Together the 3 of them looked out at the land that had saved them, and broken them, and rebuilt them all over again. A red leaf tumbled past. A memory. A promise. "She didn't jump for fame," the radio voice said. "She jumped for redemption." And Scout, once a pup forgotten by nature, stood quietly, still guarding, still loyal, still here. He didn't bark for food. He barked for the truth. So now we ask you, what's your story with a loyal animal? If you've ever been saved by a creature who couldn't speak your language, but understood your heart, share it with us. And if this story touched you, help us keep these stories alive. Subscribe to the German Shepherd channel, because sometimes what we save ends up saving us.